James Harrison believed he had only one daughter, until the afternoon he saw her identical face smiling back at him from across a crowded playground, shattering everything he thought he knew about his past. James Harrison sat quietly on the wooden park bench, savoring the mild warmth of the early spring sun on his face, enjoying the sound of children laughing and shouting as they played nearby. It was one of those rare Sunday afternoons when he allowed himself to pause, to set aside the endless stream of responsibilities and meetings that filled his life as CEO of a tech empire. His attention, however, was devoted entirely to his 6-year-old daughter, Emma. With her waist-length dark hair flowing behind her as she ran, her bright blue eyes sparkling with joy, she was unquestionably the center of his world. James smiled softly as he watched her navigate the monkey bars with determination, marveling again at how effortlessly Emma mirrored his own features. She was his little clone, and everyone who knew them remarked how much she resembled him. Just as he was about to call her over for a snack, something in the crowd of playing children caught his eye. He straightened slightly, his gaze sharpening, his heart suddenly thumping in his chest with strange intensity. Across the playground, climbing up a bright red slide, was another little girl. For a moment, James thought he was seeing things, a trick of the sunlight perhaps, or simply the natural confusion that happens when dozens of children run around in similar jackets and sneakers. But as he stood slowly, he realized there was no mistake. The girl he saw was almost an exact copy of his Emma. She had the same thick, dark hair falling in gentle waves past her shoulders, the same delicate features, and when she turned, laughing at something her playmate had said, he felt a sudden jolt as if the earth had shifted under his feet. Her eyes, large, clear, and unmistakably bright blue, mirrored Emma's own exactly. James felt a rush of confusion and disbelief, his body moving forward before his mind fully comprehended the action. He needed to get closer, to see her clearly, to confirm whether this was merely coincidence or something much more profound. He tried to rationalize, to convince himself that plenty of children resembled one another, that surely it was just a strange coincidence. Yet the striking resemblance felt far beyond ordinary. His footsteps quickened until he stood only a few feet away, unnoticed by the children deeply immersed in their play. James studied the mysterious girl's movements, the tilt of her head when she spoke, the playful way she brushed hair from her face, each gesture uncannily familiar. Then suddenly, from the corner of his eye, James caught sight of a woman approaching the girl, her arms outstretched affectionately. He froze instantly, recognition hitting him like a physical blow. His breath caught painfully in his throat. It was Alice. Alice, the woman he had loved passionately, who had suddenly and inexplicably vanished from his life just after their twin daughters were born. Alice, who had left him without explanation, taking one daughter and leaving Emma behind in his care. James had searched for her desperately in those early months, exhausting all resources, hiring investigators, but finding nothing. She had vanished without a trace, leaving only emptiness and unanswered questions behind. Now, there she stood, right in front of him, embracing this child who was so obviously Emma's twin sister. He stared, unable to move, unable to breathe. He had spent years imagining this moment, dreaming of finding Alice again, of reclaiming the daughter he had lost without knowing her. But seeing them now, in real life, felt surreal. He saw Alice's gentle smile as she spoke softly to her daughter, smoothing back her hair lovingly. He could see clearly how much she had aged, still beautiful, but now with lines around her eyes, her shoulders carrying a quiet, weary grace. James felt his heart race painfully fast, torn between the impulse to rush forward and demand explanations and the fear that doing so would cause Alice to flee again, vanishing back into shadows that had hidden her so thoroughly before. Lost in this chaotic whirlwind of emotions, James hadn't noticed Emma quietly approach him, tugging lightly at his sleeve, curious about his frozen stance. "Daddy?" she asked quietly, her eyes wide and questioning, pulling him from his stunned reverie. He looked down at his daughter's innocent, trusting face and tried to gather himself. Kneeling gently to meet her gaze, he managed a shaky smile, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered, but inside, nothing felt okay. He glanced back toward Alice and the girl, heart hammering in his chest. Alice's eyes suddenly lifted, meeting his own across the crowded playground. Her expression shifted from gentle calm to shocked recognition in an instant. Their gazes locked, heavy with a shared history filled with love, loss, and unanswered pain. Without a word, Alice quickly turned away, grabbing her daughter's hand and hurrying toward the park exit, leaving James standing in silent disbelief, holding on to Emma tightly, knowing his life had just changed forever, again. James spent the rest of that evening lost in thought, pacing around his large, modern home while Emma peacefully slept upstairs, unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in their lives. His mind raced, replaying the brief, intense moment in the park when his eyes had met Alice's again for the first time in 6 years. The girl beside her had been unmistakably identical to Emma. James struggled to piece it all together, wondering how Alice had managed to vanish so completely, leaving no trace, only to resurface suddenly like this. He felt both anger and sadness intertwine sharply in his chest. The betrayal he'd felt years ago, which he'd thought was buried beneath layers of daily life, surged fresh and raw to the surface. Unable to rest, he began searching for Alice online, determined to find out everything he could about where she'd been and what she'd done. After a few frustrating hours, his efforts yielded results. Alice had indeed changed her name and had built a quiet life for herself and their other daughter in a nearby town, barely 20 miles away from him this entire time. The irony felt almost cruel. All these years spent wondering, longing, and she had been within easy reach. He stared at the screen, at the recent photos of Alice smiling gently at their other daughter, Chloe, who was smiling back in blissful ignorance of her father's existence, or the twin sister who lived so close yet was entirely unknown to her. James felt a crushing weight of responsibility and uncertainty. Should he confront Alice immediately, demanding answers, or approach slowly and carefully, afraid of pushing her back into hiding? He sat back in his chair, pressing his fingertips against his temples, thinking deeply. He knew he had every right to be angry, to demand explanations for what Alice had done. Yet something stopped him from picking up the phone in fury. It was Chloe's innocent face, the joy in her eyes as she looked up at her mother. James realized with painful clarity that his next moves needed to be careful, deliberate, not just for himself, but for both his daughters. After a restless night, James finally decided to contact Alice cautiously, through a discreet message, requesting a private meeting to talk. He kept his tone neutral, betraying neither anger nor resentment, simply asking her to give him a chance to understand. Hours later, her hesitant reply came, agreeing to meet him at a small, quiet cafe on the outskirts of town the following evening. He spent the next day tense and anxious, struggling to maintain composure during meetings and calls, unable to shake thoughts of the conversation ahead. When evening finally arrived, James drove to the cafe, his nerves tightly wound. He found Alice already waiting, sitting quietly at a corner table, fingers nervously tapping against her coffee cup. As he approached, she looked up, meeting his eyes with a wary, cautious expression. Neither spoke immediately. Instead, they studied each other carefully, noting the changes that time had brought. Alice still carried herself with a quiet dignity that had always drawn him in, but now there was a guarded sorrow behind her eyes he hadn't seen before. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice quiet but firm. "Why did you take Chloe and vanish without a word, leaving Emma behind?" Alice inhaled deeply, visibly shaken by his directness. "I had no choice, James," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I panicked. When the girls were born, I saw how you wanted to control everything, our home, our future, even how we raised our daughters. I was scared you'd take both of them from me completely. I couldn't risk losing everything, so I made a terrible decision. I took Chloe, thinking I could protect at least one of my children from being completely swallowed up by your world." James listened silently, the sting of her words heavy in his chest. His instinct was to protest, to argue that he had never intended harm, that he'd only wanted the best life for his family. But deep down, he recognized a truth in her fear. Back then, he'd been blinded by ambition, too focused on building an empire to realize what he was losing at home. "Did Chloe ever ask about her father, about Emma?" James asked quietly, fighting to keep his voice steady. Alice nodded, her eyes filling with tears. She quickly blinked away. "She did, constantly. But I told her you were gone, unreachable. I wanted to save her from feeling abandoned, from thinking she wasn't enough. I know it was wrong. But once I started that lie, I couldn't stop it." James exhaled heavily, understanding the depth of her pain even if he couldn't justify her actions. He reached slowly across the table, not touching her hand but laying his palm open between them as a sign of peace. "Alice, I want Chloe and Emma to know each other. They deserve to have each other. Please, don't run from this again. Let's fix the damage together." Alice stared at his open hand, the air thick with unspoken fears and fragile hope. After a long pause, she finally nodded, tears escaping quietly down her cheeks. "I want that too," she whispered. They left the cafe that night without hugs or smiles, each carrying uncertainty but also a newfound determination. Neither knew exactly what the future would bring, but for the first time in years, they were both walking toward it together. In the days following their tense yet revealing conversation, James and Alice cautiously began the delicate task of reconnecting their separate worlds. Neither was fully prepared for how emotionally charged their interactions would be, each phone call or brief text exchange carrying layers of unresolved history and carefully masked vulnerabilities. James felt a constant internal battle between the desire to rebuild trust and the lingering resentment over Alice's choices. Meanwhile, Alice struggled with guilt, constantly worrying if allowing James back into Chloe's life would only lead to heartbreak for both girls. Yet despite their fears, both knew it was essential for Emma and Chloe to finally meet, to have the chance to grow up knowing they had each other. James arranged their first family meeting at a neutral place, a quiet, friendly diner halfway between their two homes. That morning, as James carefully brushed Emma's long dark hair, smoothing the strands gently, he noticed his hands trembling slightly. Emma watched him curiously through the mirror, sensing his anxiety but not fully understanding its cause. James smiled reassuringly, doing his best to hide his nerves. "You're going to meet someone very special today, Em," he said softly, keeping his voice calm and steady. Emma turned to look at him, eyes wide and full of innocent curiosity, and simply nodded, trusting him completely. When James and Emma entered the diner, Alice and Chloe were already seated at a small booth, Chloe playing with a napkin while Alice stared intently out the window, lost in thought. The moment Chloe glanced up, her eyes widened in shock and wonder, her little mouth dropping open. Emma stopped beside James, equally startled. The two girls stared at each other across the small space, their identical faces registering confusion, curiosity, and a quiet sense of recognition. No one spoke immediately, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly and cautiously, the girls approached each other, their eyes locked in mutual fascination. James and Alice watched in silent awe, their own tensions temporarily forgotten. Chloe reached out a small hand and touched Emma's cheek gently, as if checking to see if she was truly real. Emma giggled softly at the touch, and suddenly, both girls smiled at once, their faces lighting up in perfect synchronization. They didn't speak, they simply stood there, absorbing each other's presence, somehow instinctively knowing they were deeply connected. Seeing their daughters together for the first time, James and Alice shared a glance filled with both joy and sorrow, joy at the immediate bond between the girls, sorrow at all the lost years. James silently motioned for Alice to join him at the table, and as they sat down, both found it strangely comforting to watch the twins interact so naturally, so effortlessly, despite having spent their lives apart. "I never imagined it would feel like this," Alice admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "They act like they've always known each other." James nodded, unable to tear his eyes away from the two girls who were now laughing quietly, exchanging small secrets as though they'd never been apart. "It's like they recognize something deeper than memories," he murmured thoughtfully. "They just know they're sisters." Over lunch, the conversation was careful but gentle. Alice shared small stories about Chloe's life, her hobbies, her school, while James spoke lovingly about Emma, describing her favorite activities and quirks. Gradually, the tension between James and Alice softened, replaced by a growing sense of cautious hope. They began to see beyond their own hurts and mistakes, focusing instead on the happiness blossoming right before their eyes. By the end of their meal, Emma and Chloe had moved from quiet curiosity to animated conversation, giggling freely as they compared their favorite cartoons, snacks, and colors. As they stood outside the diner preparing to leave, Emma suddenly reached out to hug Chloe tightly. Chloe, slightly startled at first, quickly wrapped her arms around her sister, holding on to her with a fierceness that brought tears to Alice's eyes. James swallowed the lump in his throat, deeply moved by the powerful innocence and instinctive love shared by his daughters. That evening, after putting Emma to bed, James sat alone in the quiet living room, thinking deeply about the profound changes ahead. He knew the road wouldn't be easy, there was still so much healing needed between himself and Alice, and the girls would undoubtedly have many questions in the coming days. But tonight, for the first time in 6 years, James felt a genuine sense of optimism. He understood now that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting past mistakes, it was about choosing to move forward despite them. And as he sat there quietly, James promised himself he would do everything possible to give Emma and Chloe the family they had always deserved. Over the weeks following that emotional first meeting, James and Alice gradually allowed their lives to intertwine again, navigating carefully around the delicate boundaries that remained between them. Visits became more regular, transitioning from neutral settings to their homes, each encounter deepening the bond between Emma and Chloe. The two girls quickly became inseparable, thriving together as if making up for all the lost time. James couldn't help but marvel at how effortlessly they bonded, often catching himself watching them with quiet wonder, amazed at the natural connection that neither distance nor time had managed to diminish. Despite the growing closeness of their daughters, James and Alice maintained a careful distance, their interactions still marked by caution. Neither of them dared to openly discuss their own lingering emotions or the complicated history that lay unresolved beneath their polite conversations. Both instinctively feared risking the fragile trust they had built by reopening old wounds. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that ignoring their past would not be sustainable. Each time their eyes met across a room, there was a silent acknowledgement of unfinished business, a deep-rooted pain that remained carefully hidden beneath calm exteriors. One rainy afternoon, after James had dropped Chloe off at Alice's house, he lingered a moment longer than usual, standing uncertainly in her entryway. Alice looked at him, sensing immediately that something was weighing heavily on him. After a long pause, she quietly invited him in. They settled in her small, warmly lit kitchen, a gentle rain softly tapping against the windows. The silence stretched between them as they both searched for words, aware that something important needed to be said, but neither knew precisely where to start. Finally, James broke the silence, speaking quietly and carefully. "Alice, we can't keep avoiding the past. The girls are thriving together now, but we're still stuck somewhere between who we used to be and who we are now." Alice's eyes met his, the uncertainty clear in her expression. She nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in his words. "You're right. But I'm terrified, James. I'm afraid that if we revisit those moments, everything we've built for the girls will collapse." James shook his head gently. "Maybe by confronting it, we can finally heal. Maybe we can actually build something stronger. For them, and for us." Alice hesitated, gripping her mug tightly as though it might offer comfort. She exhaled softly, gathering her courage. "When I left, I felt trapped," she admitted quietly. "I saw your ambition, your drive, and how quickly our family was becoming secondary to your career. I was scared, James. I thought you'd take our daughters from me if you believed I wasn't good enough." James listened quietly, absorbing the raw pain in her words. It stung deeply, but he also recognized truth in her fears. "I was blind," he confessed softly. "Back then, I was so consumed with success that I lost sight of the most important thing in my life, you. Our family. After you disappeared, I blamed you completely. But now, seeing it clearly, I realize my own responsibility in driving you away. Alice's eyes softened, the defensiveness slowly fading from her face. I was wrong too, she whispered. Taking Chloe away, hiding the truth, it was a mistake. At the time, I thought it was the only way to protect at least one daughter from your world. But I never stopped thinking about you, about Emma. The guilt I carried, it never left. James reached slowly across the table, gently covering her hand with his own, a gesture of reconciliation, comfort, and tentative forgiveness. Alice didn't pull away, instead, she allowed the warmth of his touch to slowly penetrate her guarded heart. They sat together silently, allowing the shared moment of vulnerability to sink in, to heal something small yet profound between them. Over the next hour, as the rain continued outside, James and Alice cautiously revisited old memories, both good and painful ones. With each shared memory, the heaviness between them lifted slightly, replaced gradually by a growing sense of understanding. They realized the path forward wouldn't be easy, but at least they were now choosing to walk it together rather than apart. When it was time for James to leave, Alice walked him quietly to the door, both of them sensing something important had shifted. As he turned to go, James paused and looked deeply into her eyes, allowing himself to see the woman he had once loved so fiercely, and perhaps, he thought cautiously, the woman he still loved even now. "Thank you for letting me in," he said softly, meaning far more than the physical space of her home. Alice smiled gently, her eyes holding a cautious yet hopeful warmth. "Thank you for coming back," she replied quietly, understanding exactly what he meant. That evening, driving home through the gentle rain, James felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in many years, he felt genuinely hopeful, not just for his daughters, but also for himself. He understood clearly that real healing required honesty and courage, and for the first time, he was truly ready to face both. After that rainy afternoon, something fundamentally shifted between James and Alice. It wasn't immediate or dramatic, but subtle and steady, an unfolding of trust and a cautious rediscovery of comfort in each other's presence. Their interactions became easier, their smiles warmer, their conversations less guarded. While they were careful not to rush anything or push too quickly, they gradually allowed small intimacies to return, like sharing private jokes or brief, lingering glances that spoke more than words ever could. The girls noticed the change as well, sensing the newfound ease between their parents, which only seemed to deepen their own happiness. Emma and Chloe thrived as their family slowly, cautiously stitched itself back together. One bright, sunny afternoon, James invited Alice and Chloe to join him and Emma at the lake house he had kept for occasional retreats. It was a peaceful spot, surrounded by trees, with clear water reflecting the vast, cloudless sky. Alice hesitated at first, memories of their past family trips to this very place surfacing sharply. But when she saw the excitement sparkling in Chloe's eyes and Emma practically jumping with anticipation, she agreed, realizing it was time to make new memories that could help heal the painful ones. At the lake house, the atmosphere was vibrant with children's laughter as the twins ran barefoot along the grassy shore, chasing butterflies, their matching dark hair streaming behind them. James watched them from the porch, a contented smile on his face, quietly amazed at how natural this all felt. He glanced toward Alice, who stood nearby, arms crossed loosely over her chest as she watched their daughters with tender pride. For a long moment, he simply observed her, struck again by the quiet strength she'd always possessed. She felt his gaze and turned to meet his eyes, offering a gentle, tentative smile in return. "I never thought we'd be here again," she confessed softly, her voice tinged with quiet emotion. James nodded in understanding, stepping closer until they were standing side by side, shoulders nearly touching, both gazing out over the shimmering water. "I used to imagine this so many times," James admitted quietly, eyes focused on the horizon. "Being together again, having our family whole. I never thought it could truly happen, but somehow here we are." Alice exhaled slowly, a small sigh of relief and wonder mixed together. "Maybe we both needed to grow separately to realize what we truly wanted," she replied, her voice gentle, reflective. That afternoon, they spent hours playing with the girls, swimming, building sandcastles, and grilling dinner as the sun began to set, bathing everything in soft gold and pink hues. Emma and Chloe sat side by side on the edge of the dock, feet dangling in the water, whispering secrets and giggling together. James and Alice sat behind them, close enough to touch but not quite daring to reach out, comfortable simply sharing the moment. Later, as stars started filling the evening sky, the twins drifted off to sleep on the couch, wrapped in soft blankets. James carried each of them gently upstairs to bed, carefully tucking them in. Returning downstairs, he found Alice quietly tidying the kitchen, lost in thought. James paused, simply watching her, struck by the warmth and familiarity of the scene. "I've missed this," he said quietly, surprising even himself with the admission. Alice stopped what she was doing and turned toward him, eyes searching his face carefully. "I have too," she admitted softly, stepping closer. "I tried so hard to convince myself I didn't, but deep down I always knew that was a lie." James closed the remaining distance between them carefully, cautiously reaching out to gently touch her face, brushing away a strand of hair. His touch was tender, careful, filled with years of longing and regret, and hope for forgiveness. Alice leaned into his hand, eyes briefly closing, accepting the silent gesture of love and reconciliation. "I'm sorry for everything," James whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "For every mistake I made, for every moment I chose ambition over our family." Alice opened her eyes, holding his gaze with quiet sincerity. "And I'm sorry for running away," she replied gently, her voice steady but vulnerable. "For splitting our family apart. I thought I was protecting us, but all I did was cause pain." Slowly, naturally, their faces drew closer until their lips met in a tender, heartfelt kiss, a cautious yet powerful declaration of the love that still remained despite all the years and heartache. They pulled back slightly, foreheads resting gently together, breathing softly in unison as they let the quiet, meaningful moment sink in. "Do you think we can really start again?" Alice whispered cautiously, the question laced with hope and a lingering hint of fear. James gently lifted her chin so their eyes met clearly, his voice firm with determination. "I believe we already have." That night, with the lake outside whispering gently under the starlit sky, James and Alice sat side by side, quietly planning their future, not the perfect future they had once imagined, but something even better, a real, honest life built from hard lessons and genuine forgiveness. They understood clearly now that what had been broken was not lost forever, and as long as they chose each other, every step forward was a step closer to true happiness. In the weeks after their trip to the lake house, James and Alice found themselves steadily growing closer, carefully rebuilding trust with quiet gestures and meaningful conversations. The shift wasn't dramatic, nor did it erase all the past hurts, but it was genuine, rooted in honesty, vulnerability, and an earnest desire to build something lasting. The girls flourished within this newfound stability, their laughter filling both homes as they spent more and more time together. It became normal for them to share breakfasts, evenings, and weekend afternoons as a family. Gradually, the blurred boundaries between James and Alice's separate lives faded, replaced by a sense of unity neither had felt in years. One afternoon, as the girls played contentedly in the garden, James arrived unexpectedly at Alice's home carrying a small box in his hand. Alice greeted him warmly at the door, curiosity clear in her eyes as she invited him inside. James hesitated only briefly, clearly struggling with nerves, which Alice found strangely endearing. They sat down together at the kitchen table, sunlight filtering softly through the windows, illuminating the space around them with warmth and comfort. "I've been thinking a lot lately," James started slowly, his eyes sincere as they searched hers. "About us, about Emma and Chloe, about everything we've been through. The truth is, every day I spend with you and the girls makes me realize how empty my life was without you." Alice listened carefully, feeling a gentle flutter in her chest. She remained silent, sensing the importance of the moment, giving him space to gather his thoughts fully. He continued, his voice quiet yet steady, "I don't want us to stay in this uncertain place forever. We've found each other again, we've built trust, but I want us to be a real family again, not just for our daughters, but for us too. Slowly, he placed the small box on the table, opening it gently to reveal a delicate gold necklace. It was familiar to Alice, one he had given her long ago, before their lives had unraveled. Alice's breath caught softly, memories rushing back vividly as she gently touched the smooth surface of the pendant. I kept it all these years, James said quietly, watching her reaction carefully. I couldn't let it go. It reminded me every day of what I'd lost, what I hoped someday I might find again. Alice met his eyes, her own glistening with quiet emotion, feeling a wave of warmth wash over her heart. James, she whispered gently, her voice tender and filled with genuine affection. Are you sure about this? Are you sure we're ready? He reached out, gently taking her hand in his own, his touch comforting and steady. I've never been more certain, he answered sincerely. I know we've both changed. We're not the same people who separated years ago. But I think the people we've become deserve a second chance. We deserve a chance to finally get it right. Alice smiled softly, carefully lifting the necklace from the box and feeling its comforting weight in her hand. She studied it thoughtfully, then met James's eyes again, her expression resolute. I want that too, she admitted softly, her voice clear and sincere. I want us to be a family again, not just for our daughters, but because I still love you. I never really stopped. James exhaled softly, relief and joy mixing warmly within his chest. Without hesitation, he rose slowly, moved closer, and gently clasped the necklace around Alice's neck, letting his hands rest lightly on her shoulders. She reached up, her fingers briefly touching his hand in a quiet moment of shared intimacy and silent promise. At that moment, the girls burst into the kitchen, laughing, their cheeks flushed from playing outside. They stopped immediately, sensing the tenderness in the room. Chloe tilted her head slightly, eyes curious, while Emma stepped forward cautiously. Are you guys okay? Emma asked, glancing carefully between her parents. James smiled warmly, stepping back to pull both girls close, gathering them gently into his embrace. Alice joined them, completing their little circle. We're better than okay, James answered gently. We have something important to tell you. He paused briefly, gathering his thoughts, then continued softly, your mom and I love each other very much, and we decided we want to all live together again, as a real family. The twins exchanged surprised glances before erupting into delighted giggles, throwing their arms around their parents in pure, innocent joy. James and Alice exchanged warm, relieved smiles over their daughters' heads, both deeply aware of how far they'd come. That evening, as they shared dinner together as a reunited family, laughter filling the small kitchen, James found himself deeply grateful for the painful journey they'd endured. It had tested their strength, their hearts, and their love, but ultimately led them back to each other, wiser and stronger than before. They had not simply returned to the past, instead, they had built something new, stronger and truer than anything they'd ever known. As James glanced around the table, his heart filled with peace, knowing that finally, after years of uncertainty and pain, he was exactly where he belonged. In the months following their decision to reunite as a family, James and Alice slowly rebuilt not only their home but their entire lives around each other and their daughters. Each day brought subtle changes, gradually transforming uncertainty into a reassuring sense of belonging. The familiar rhythms of daily routines became comforting rituals, shared breakfasts filled with laughter, weekend movie nights, and bedtime stories that James and Alice took turns telling. They carefully allowed their love to rekindle, nurturing trust through small gestures, thoughtful conversations, and a deep commitment to honesty. James discovered that being together again wasn't about recapturing their past, it was about consciously choosing each other every day, fully aware of their imperfections yet determined to move forward hand in hand. One crisp autumn afternoon, James quietly entered their cozy family room and found Alice sitting on the couch, gazing thoughtfully out the window as orange leaves gently swirled outside. He sensed immediately that something important was on her mind. Approaching slowly, he took a seat beside her, softly placing his hand over hers. Alice turned toward him, her eyes thoughtful, reflecting deep emotions she had clearly been wrestling with. "I've been thinking," she began gently, her voice careful yet steady, "about how much has changed between us. It's incredible how much stronger we've become. But sometimes I'm still scared, James, scared that all of this happiness could somehow slip away again." James felt a pang of empathy at her words, knowing exactly what she meant. He nodded gently, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "I understand that fear completely. I've felt it too. But the difference now is that we're not hiding from each other anymore. We face things together, openly. We won't let misunderstandings or silence pull us apart again." Alice met his gaze warmly, feeling deep comfort in his quiet confidence. "I believe you," she said softly, letting herself lean slightly against him. "But I think there's something we still need to do. Something to truly help us move forward together." James waited, sensing the gravity in her tone, allowing her the space she needed to express herself fully. After a brief pause, Alice continued gently, "I think we need to tell the girls the truth about everything, about why we separated, about how I took Chloe away and why we spent so many years apart. They're old enough now to understand, and they deserve to hear it from us openly, before they find out from someone else or begin asking questions we can't answer." James felt a momentary tension in his chest, realizing immediately the emotional weight of what Alice proposed. It was daunting, the thought of exposing their painful past so openly. But he also recognized the importance of transparency. The girls deserved honesty, even if it was difficult. He took a slow, deep breath, and then nodded resolutely. "You're right," he agreed quietly, his voice calm despite the weight of the decision. "They deserve to know the truth, and we owe it to them and ourselves to be completely honest." Later that evening, after dinner and homework were completed, James and Alice sat down with Emma and Chloe in the warmth of the family room. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, and the gentle glow filled the room with a comforting atmosphere. The girls, sensing the seriousness of their parents' expressions, sat quietly, curiosity clear in their identical bright blue eyes. James spoke first, gently yet honestly, carefully choosing each word to convey the complicated truth. "Girls, your mom and I have something important to share with you. We want you to understand why our family was separated for so many years, and why it took us so long to find each other again." Together, James and Alice took turns explaining their past mistakes and the fears that had driven them apart. They spoke honestly about Alice's choice to leave with Chloe, the misunderstandings, and their regrets. The twins listened quietly, occasionally glancing at each other in silent understanding, absorbing every word thoughtfully. When James and Alice finished speaking, there was a brief silence in the room, allowing the twins to process everything they'd heard. Emma was the first to speak, her voice small yet steady. "But you're together now. You fixed it. That means everything's okay, right?" Alice smiled gently, nodding with relief and gratitude. "Yes, sweetheart. We're together now, and everything's going to be okay." Chloe, who had been quieter, suddenly reached out to take her mother's hand, looking earnestly at both her parents. "We forgive you," she said sincerely, her voice clear and unwavering. "We understand. And we're happy you're both here with us now." Tears glistened softly in Alice's eyes, and James felt a quiet wave of relief wash over him. He reached out, gently drawing both girls into an embrace, his heart overwhelmed by gratitude for their innocent, unconditional forgiveness. That night, after tucking Emma and Chloe into bed, James and Alice stood together quietly outside the twins' bedroom, sharing a deep sense of relief and gratitude. They had finally crossed one of the most challenging bridges, the truth had been told, forgiveness granted, and their path forward felt clearer and stronger than ever. As they settled into bed later that evening, James gently wrapped his arms around Alice, feeling her relax into him, her breathing calm and steady. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, whispering softly, "We made it through. We're stronger now, and nothing can tear us apart again." Alice smiled softly against his chest, feeling true peace in her heart for the first time in years. Together, always, she whispered back quietly, knowing it wasn't just a promise, it was the simple, honest truth they both deeply believed. As months turned into years, the once broken family flourished together, strengthened by honesty, trust, and a deep commitment to each other. Emma and Chloe grew inseparable, sharing not only their remarkable physical similarities but also a profound emotional bond that seemed almost intuitive. James and Alice built their lives around their daughters, cherishing simple family routines and the joy of everyday moments. They celebrated birthdays, milestones, and quiet achievements with genuine enthusiasm, fully appreciating every precious moment that life offered them. Their home, once fractured by secrets and pain, became a sanctuary filled with laughter, warmth, and unconditional love. On a bright Saturday afternoon, under the gentle warmth of the early summer sun, James and Alice stood hand in hand in a small, intimate ceremony in their backyard, surrounded only by their closest friends and family. Emma and Chloe wore matching soft blue dresses, their smiles radiant as they stood proudly beside their parents, holding delicate bouquets of wildflowers. James glanced at Alice, overwhelmed by gratitude for the second chance they'd been given. Her eyes shone brightly, reflecting a deep happiness he'd only dreamed of during their years apart. As they exchanged quiet, heartfelt vows, their voices were filled with sincerity, acknowledging not only the pain of the past but also the strength and healing they'd found together. After the ceremony, they celebrated simply, with homemade food, laughter, and the comforting ease of genuine friendship. James watched quietly as Emma and Chloe twirled together in the grass, their laughter drifting warmly through the air. He felt a deep, comforting sense of peace, profoundly aware of how much he'd changed since the days when success and ambition had overshadowed everything. Now, he understood clearly that true fulfillment came not from wealth or achievement, but from love, connection, and family. That evening, after their guests had left and the girls were tucked safely into bed, James and Alice sat together on the porch, wrapped comfortably in a soft blanket as stars filled the sky above them. The quiet surrounding them was gentle, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the soft hoot of an owl in the distance. James held Alice close, savoring the warmth of her body against his, deeply grateful that they'd found their way back to each other. "I never imagined we'd find our way here again," Alice whispered softly, resting her head comfortably on his shoulder, her voice gentle and thoughtful. "I spent so long believing our love was lost forever." James nodded slowly, pressing a gentle kiss to her hair. "I felt the same," he admitted quietly. "I was convinced I'd lost you forever. But somehow, we were given another chance, and I'll never take this for granted." Alice lifted her head slightly, looking deeply into his eyes. "Do you think we needed to lose each other to truly understand how to love each other better?" she asked thoughtfully. James smiled gently, running his thumb softly across her cheek. "Maybe," he replied softly. "Maybe we needed the pain to learn patience and compassion, to realize what truly mattered. But now that we're here, I know I'd never trade this, our family, our love, for anything in the world." Alice smiled warmly, leaning in gently to kiss him, her lips soft and reassuring. They sat together quietly for a long time afterward, simply holding each other, allowing the peace and happiness of the moment to settle deeply within their hearts. In the years that followed, their family grew even stronger. Emma and Chloe blossomed into confident, kind-hearted young women, shaped by the honest love and resilience of their parents. James continued to lead his business successfully, but now he did so with compassion, prioritizing his family above all else, demonstrating to his daughters the true meaning of balance, kindness, and commitment. Alice, embracing her strength fully, pursued her own passions, building a fulfilling life that enriched both her family and her own heart. Years later, as James and Alice sat watching their daughters prepare for college, standing proudly side by side, holding hands, they reflected on the incredible journey they'd shared. They knew their story wasn't perfect, it had been messy, complicated, and filled with mistakes, but they also knew that it was deeply, undeniably real. It was a story of redemption, forgiveness, and the quiet strength of choosing love again and again, despite all odds. That night, As James gently wrapped his arms around Alice, their hearts filled with pride and gratitude, he whispered softly, "We made it. Through all the pain and uncertainty, we found our way home." Alice smiled warmly, resting peacefully in his embrace, knowing the truth of his words. Together, they had transformed heartbreak into healing, fear into courage, and loss into lasting love. In my view, the ending of this story resonates deeply because it underscores how real love and genuine forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds. The power of James and Alice's reunion lies in its realism. They don't simply forget past mistakes, instead, they consciously choose to learn from them and grow together. Their journey emphasizes the transformative strength of honesty and vulnerability, showing that second chances, when embraced thoughtfully, can create an even stronger bond than before. Ultimately, it's not the perfection of their relationship that moves me most, but its authenticity, proving that love is not about never falling apart, but about consistently choosing to rebuild, no matter how difficult the path.